Today I am giving my review of Time Rider by Tom DeLonge and A.J. Hartley. This book just came out this past October. It is the authors' most recent collaboration together. I've read most of their collaborations together in the past and have thought that those were really good, so I was really looking forward to this as well. This is adult science fiction, definitely considered a thriller as well, but because it deals with time travel, I would also sort of consider it historical fiction, but maybe not really, but at least it does have things that take place in the past. So this book deals with a society in the future called the Design. Specifically, it takes place in the year 2157. The society became this way over time and after a war called the Great Conflagration, in which the main character Bowie fought in. However, that was a little while ago. Nowadays, he is a messenger between the intelligence sector and the labor depots. There are different levels in this society. He is wealthy enough to live comfortably, but he's not like at the highest level, but he's certainly not poor like his brother. More on him later, where they have to do much harder labor to survive. I'll describe more of what the Design is like. So like I said, Bowie has a brother. It's unusual for people in this society to have families. In fact, it's looked down upon and it's not very common. This society doesn't regard history very much. They think of it as irrelevant. They think that they are superior to their past. Everything appears to be clean and pristine. They think that, unlike the way they lived in the past, they are not barbaric and that they are in order. It's very much a desert land without animals. Emotions aren't really talked about or embraced, and sensory indulgence such as eating for flavor rather than sustenance is considered decadent and weakness. They don't really have fiction and they don't have much art. So yeah, that may sound pretty bland, but for Bowie that is all he has known, and he has been taught by his society that that is good and the right way to live. If I show the naked hardback of this book, you can see this symbol. This is the symbol of the Design, and this symbol has some significance throughout the book. Like I said, Bowie lives comfortably, but he's pretty much a loner. His relationship with his brother is a bit strained. He doesn't have like a spouse or children or anything like that. That's not really in this world. The humans are more genetically engineered. However, now Bowie has been sent on a very important mission. He's not quite sure why he's been chosen for it, but he has been. He has been sent to time travel, which has never been done before by this world. He's not sure why they've chosen him to do it, but they sent him on a mission to make sure that the president of JFK happens. They tell him that it's important that this happens, and that is the mission that he is sent on, and that is mainly what this book is about. The spike on the cover is the time travel vehicle that is used. They give him some material to study and prepare with, but not much. He ultimately doesn't have much time before he's sent back to 1963. He learned some things, but a lot wasn't covered, so he doesn't really feel prepared before he goes back nearly 200 years in the past. Plus, like I said, the Design doesn't really favor history very much, so they probably thought it was perhaps not that relevant for him to know it before going. I found the time travel aspect of this pretty interesting, especially when he went to a time in the past that was before I was born, but like I'm still familiar with it, so that was interesting. And it was interesting just seeing him be as confused as he was, because he didn't really know what to do in certain situations. He didn't understand a lot of things. And of course there's the fact that he can't be seen or have anyone suspect anything about him. Well, he can be seen, just not being seen doing futuristic things, and he can't let people know when and where he's from. So yeah, I found the time travel and history aspects of this pretty interesting. I think these authors are both clearly ones who really do their research. I think that was evident in this book. I found this book interesting right away from what I had already heard about it before reading it, and when I started reading it. I thought it was entertaining seeing Bowie experience things for the first time that we're familiar with. He was so, like I said, confused and fascinated. He's just not used to this world. But like I said, he's fascinated. He does find it interesting because it's very different from what he's used to. And also, while he is in the past, he meets a journalist named Sandra Rossi, and a lot of the book is about them interacting and working together as he develops sort of a relationship, like a partnership with her, as they start working together. And I found their dynamic together pretty interesting because she is actually supposed to be in that time, and so seeing them interact was pretty entertaining. He doesn't understand a lot of things about their world and a lot of cultural references. There are definitely a lot of mysteries in this book, mainly about the main storyline, but another note I had was about his brother. Like, at the beginning you can see the relationship is kind of strained, so you're kind of curious about why that is. I didn't understand all the science and everything in this book, but I don't think the authors necessarily intended for you to understand every little thing. It was a little confusing, and science fiction just isn't my favorite genre, so I don't always find it super interesting or easy to follow along with, but I still thought this book was good, and ultimately it's like about something. Like, it's not just story, like it's very much trying to tell certain messages and has certain themes, so that made it more enjoyable for me, that it wasn't just someone trying to come up with a cool world. I think it was someone trying to come up with a world that represented what our society could become, and I could see that, or at least it becoming similar to that based on just the way we treat things now. In the middle of the book, there are a few pages of some nice artwork of the characters in the world, and I thought that was a really nice touch. I think the writing is pretty good for the most part. I think it was clever. Every once in a while there will be a line that's like really clever or profound or something. I was interested learning more about the design and how it worked as I read on. Their novel, A Planet of Blood and Ice, the first book in the Cathedrals of Glass series, also contains a futuristic sort of dystopian society, and the society in Cathedrals of Glass is not the exact same. I'd say there are definitely some similarities, but they are two different worlds in case you've also read this. I think this book has some interesting commentary on society and where it could be heading. This book has a lot of what I thought were really good and important themes about like humanity, what it means to be human, what it means to truly be alive and to live, about love, connection, and family. Because like, as I described, the design doesn't have a lot of that, and then when Bowie goes to 1963, it's like he experiences that and he sees that with other people. So this book kind of, I don't know the exact percentage, but some of it takes place in the present in the design, and some of it takes place in the past. There are different perspectives, like it mainly is about Bowie and Sandra, but sometimes it will go back to whatever's going on in the design with those characters while Bowie is on his mission. And those parts I didn't find as interesting, partially because the characters were unlikable, but that's kind of the point, I guess. And it was relevant to what was happening in the story. I'm not sure if it was all necessary, but I still see why it was in there, so it definitely wasn't entirely unnecessary. I thought maybe some of it could have been kind of summarized in a way, but it did show more of the world and just the severity of it, so that made sense to me. But I'm just saying, I liked Bowie and Sandra and their interactions together. I mean, I didn't absolutely love either character, but the point is, some of the other characters I just did not like as much. They were okay. I didn't really love any of the characters in this. They were fine. But yeah, the characters, like back in the design, in those perspectives, were not as enjoyable to read about. But I would say this is mostly about plot. It definitely is about humans, like I said, and their nature, but I think that it ultimately is more about the story, but the story and plot are about humanity. At least that's one of the things it's about. This book contains a lot of gunfights. It's very suspenseful, especially towards the end. Definitely has a lot of action, but there's plenty of slow downtime as well. It's not just constantly action all the time. I've heard it's good for authors to just give their readers a little break from everything, so there definitely is that in here. And while that's there, it's not just filler. It could be like the characters getting to know each other, connecting, exploring more. So it's not just like completely unnecessary just for the sake of slowing down. I'll say it gets a little complicated for things going on with Bowie and his mission. There's a lot of sneaking around. He has to be careful so as not to cause any temporal paradoxes. So that gets a little confusing, but I think the book introduces those concepts and talks about them in a way that maybe makes you start to understand that. And the story is not just simple, straightforward time travel. That's all I'll say about that. So yeah, I definitely most enjoyed the perspectives with Bowie and Sandra and their interactions together. Like I said, Bowie's a loner, so he's not like super rude and cold, but I would say he's kind of cold and tough. Like I said, he fought in the war. And I would say Sandra is a bit sassy, not exactly the most kind or polite, kind of serious and tough, but she's not like cruel or heartless at all. I mean, she goes through a lot, particularly when her and Bowie first meet. I won't say exactly how that happens, but it was pretty wild. Definitely not the best way to first meet somebody. I think they both have their strengths and weaknesses, and I think there's a lot of good character development in this book, particularly with those two. And I mean individually. I was invested in this story. I could tell a lot of research was done and put into this. I quite enjoyed Bowie and Sandra's dynamic and interactions together for the most part. It was interesting, especially because this book is about real historical events and people, similar to the author's Secret Machine series. I think it's interesting reading their books together and trying to figure out what they're trying to express and tell you through them, especially when it deals with real events and people and time periods. I find it interesting to think and wonder about it and try to figure it out. I think it definitely raises questions within the reader, but the book also raises questions for you, but you may come up with some on your own because there's a lot to this. I appreciate this book's existence and what it represents. I think it's about a lot of important things, and I think that the book is just important in general. One little thing I liked about this book is I think it's good at bringing back little things that were mentioned early on in the book, and then you hear about them again later and they're like resolved and you probably forgot about those things, but then you're like, oh yeah, that happened, and then it's tied together near the end in a satisfying way, and it's clever and unexpected. There's some of that in their book Trinity as well, and I enjoyed that. I think, as usual, A.J. Hartley's writing is pretty good with metaphors and imagery, good at describing emotions, good at making a story that's thrilling and interesting that makes you want to read more. He cares about the characters and making you care about them, which is definitely important to me in a book, and so I appreciate that. I think that Tom DeLonge and AJ Hartley are a great team together. I really like both on their own and together. And like I said, I think their books always make you think and wonder about things, and they're important and historical and interesting. Sadly though, I didn't really like this as much as their other books. Like I said, it's definitely important and I appreciate it, but in terms of just how much I enjoyed it, I am giving it 4 stars. Because like I said, the other perspectives weren't as interesting. The futuristic science society wasn't as interesting because their other books either took place in the past or in the present. So it wasn't that the design wasn't well written. I thought it was good and it made sense. But yeah, like I said, I didn't love the characters, and when I was reading this, sometimes I was really invested and other times I read it pretty slowly, which is just kind of on me, not necessarily the book, but at the same time, yeah, it just was not my favorite of theirs, but it certainly was not bad. I just didn't feel that I absolutely loved it, but I like it for what it was overall, and there were a lot of enjoyable things in it. Trinity is still my favorite of theirs together, and if you've read this book or any of these authors' books, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Thank you for watching.